I never cooked. First of all, the thought that I would be talking about food, 10 years ago, I'd have told you no. But I have fallen in love with it since I've been here at the Village, because I don't do just cooking. I was always a history buff, and I discovered something called foodways. And it's not a word we use a lot, but foodways is a way of looking at history. Military history, royal history, those are all the big people. Foodways is an approach to history where you look at everybody from the king on down, because everybody eats. And eating is everybody's favorite part, or one of their favorite parts of living. It's something we spend a lot of time doing. So I'm going to talk to you about foodways as a way of understanding Pensacola history. Now, if you look at the map, you can see that we're kind of central. We've got the Caribbean, we've got Mexico, lots of sailors coming into port in the Gulf. And so we were the confluence of a lot of different cultures. We know the big five, and that's what I'm going to spend my time on. But we also had Greeks in Pensacola. We had a lot of Scandinavians because of the maritime culture there. Their captains and sailors ended up in Pensacola. So we have a whole lot of threads flowing into the fabric of Pensacola. But the main ones I'm going to talk about are, of course, the Native Americans, the Spanish, the African Americans, the French, and the British, because those are the big, like the Five Flags city. We're going to talk about them. And let's go first of all to the Native Americans. The Native Americans were here longer than all the rest of us. They go back, as I understand it from our UWF archaeology department, 14,000 years of human inhabitants here on the Gulf Coast. If you spend that many centuries in one place, you learn that place. The Native Americans lived in great harmony with their environment. They knew what was good to eat and what wasn't. They knew what seasons you had things. They didn't do a lot with preservation. They ate what was in season, and they instinctively knew what they should be eating. But let me go back and get one thing I forgot to say. I was talking about foodways. Well, what are foodways in the first place? It's not recipes, although it includes that. It's not agriculture, although it includes that. Foodways is everything that relates to food in a culture or society. It's how we get our food, whether hunting, gathering, or agriculture. It's how we prepare it. It's how we serve it. It's how we eat it. And more importantly, it's our attitudes and beliefs about it. Is there anybody here whose family would be in an uproar if Aunt Susie didn't bring her pumpkin pie to Thanksgiving? It's a religion, okay? We have very deep felt attitudes and beliefs about food. So the Native Americans believed in the land, the seasons, moving very naturally through foodways, much more so than we do. An example of that is the Three Sisters. Squash, corn, and beans are called the Three Sisters. They're staples of the Native American diet. Native Americans throughout the Americas depend on squash, corn, and beans. They're called the sisters because ideally, sisters grow up together and support each other. My daughters, not always so much, but that's the idea. Now, the thing about the Three Sisters is they live in a symbiotic relationship. They help each other. They make each other better than they would be separately. If I plant a patch of corn, a patch of squash, and a patch of beans, I'll get some. If I plant them all together in one patch, I'll actually get more. And the Native Americans, through centuries of trial and error, learned that you plant them together. The corn grows up into a nice tall stalk. Well, beans need something to wrap around as they grow. We put stakes in the ground. The Native Americans used corn. Then they planted the pumpkins or squash or gourds around the bottom because they have great big leaves. They shade the ground and keep the moisture in so that that allows the corn and the beans to grow better. So nowadays, apparently, agriculturalists are looking at what's called symbiotic planting. If you plant certain things together, they're better off than they would be alone. The drawback to that in a modern society is, though, it's very hard to make an automatic machine that will harvest that. We don't do it in America because we have corn reapers, we have squash reapers, we have bean reapers, and they don't work together. But the Native Americans, it was all very cohesive. It was working together. They depended upon wild game and fish, the local plants and herbs, and when the Native Americans came into contact with the Europeans, the Native Americans, for the most part, were very willing to share their knowledge with the Europeans. One problem that we see, though, is a lot of times the Europeans a lot of times thought they knew better than everybody else, particularly the British. I can say that because I'm a British descendant. The Spanish, when they got to Pensacola, there is a bay full of fish. Best fish in the world, lobsters, oysters, crabs, grouper, you name it. The Spanish would send home on their ships to have salt cod imported. If you've ever seen salt cod, I've cooked with it a few times in the village, and none of the students want to eat it. When you take cod out of the package, it is stiff as a board and completely encrusted in salt. It is one of the most disgusting things you will ever see, and frankly, cooking doesn't improve it much. Why did they want that? Well, that's the whole idea behind Foodways. They wanted what they were used to. They wanted what their religion told them was Christian food as opposed to heathen food that the Native Americans ate. So they really stuck with what they were used to. But eventually, if you live around Pensacola Bay, you're going to find out that our seafood is better than salt cod. So the Native Americans really taught the Europeans a lot as they came in. Now, when the Spanish arrived, the Spanish, more so than the French, British, any of the other cultures here, were very religious. The year revolved around religion. You have Advent, you have Lent, all of the different seasons. And Lent was very important to the Spanish. In the village, when it's Lent, between Ash Wednesday and Easter, I do not use any animal products because the very devout Spanish would not even eat cheese, milk, bacon fat, anything. We think nowadays of Lent as giving up chocolate on Fridays or something like that. The Spanish took it to a whole nother level. And so Lenten cooking was very vegetable-based, very meager. There's in fact a soup called meager soup because all you ate was vegetables and broths, and the broths couldn't be made with any meat. But the Spanish did bring us some really important flavors. The Spanish, meat fat was available, but because of Lent, they couldn't always use it. And anyway, they preferred olive oil. They would have olive oil imported in huge, we've got one of them down in the village, this huge container that they brought olive oil over them. Garlic was important to the Spanish, and spices. Why did Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand send Columbus out? 2 reasons. Anybody know what they are? Gold, and something that was just as valuable as gold, spices. The Spanish loved their spices. I've got one Spanish recipe that uses 5 different kinds of pepper. White pepper, black pepper, ancho pepper, chili pepper, and cayenne pepper. And according to the Spanish, each of them has a little bit different flavor. The next thing that was important, the Native Americans did it, but it was really just what they did. They didn't have a name for it. The Spanish introduced the idea of ollas. The British would call it pottage. And what that is just a one-pot meal. It was the colonial equivalent of a crock pot. I tell people when they're in the village asking me about cooking, I tell them, in colonial America, for the average working person, lower class, working class, there were really only 2 recipes. George Washington and Bernardo de Galvez, those guys were rich. They had fancy food. But the working class had two recipes. They start out the same. Go to your garden, get what you got. Go to your larder or smokehouse, get what you got. And here's where we get the two recipes. One, throw it in a pot with some water and boil it. Throw it in a pan with some grease and fry it. Those are the only two recipes you need to be a colonial housewife. An olla in Spanish, or pottage in English, was just put everything in a pot and cook it. The neat thing about an olla or pottage is sometimes you'd keep them for weeks. As long as you keep that pot very close to the boiling point, it won't go bad. So we eat some today. Tonight I'll throw some pork and vegetables in, and it'll be done by tomorrow, and we'll eat it then. And some people would keep their ollas or pottage going actually for months. You never knew what stew you were going to eat. It was whatever there was. So those are some of the ideas that the Spanish brought into Pensacola. Then we get to the African Americans. And this picture is my true hero. His name is Michael Twitty. He is the great god of historic African American cooking, so I had to include him. The enslaved Americans brought in a lot from their home country. Okra, we all know okra. We put it in our gumbo, we eat it fried. I love me some okra. Some people don't like it because it's slimy. You just haven't had it prepared right. Come see me in the village cookhouse. But the thing about okra is it was an African dish. It was from the West Africa. How did it get here? Someone, as they were being forced, this always chokes me up, as they were being forced from their home, being taken and chained and taken into slavery across the Middle Passage, somebody grabbed a handful of okra seeds and smuggled it and kept it close to them under their clothes so that they could bring it to this new place. They didn't even know where they were going, but when they got there, they wanted okra. Because just like that nasty salt pork, okra was home. Okra was mama. Okra was something that let them remember that they were people and they had beliefs and they had food ways. Greens, rice. The Spanish used rice, but the Africans used a lot more of it. One-pot cooking methods. Again, take what you got, throw it in a pot and fry it or boil it. The thing to remember about the African Americans was you don't give the servants or the enslaved people the good stuff. They don't get the ribeye. They don't get the pork chop. What they got were the pig's feet, the hog jowls. And they made magic. You go to a soul food restaurant and they're going to serve you stuff that most of us would regard as kind of scrap food. But it was taken by those cooks, and with what they brought from Africa, and every once in a while they'd pinch a few spices from the main house, they made something that was incredible. It wasn't African, it wasn't American, it wasn't Spanish. It combined all of those into what we know as African American foodways, or soul food now. The next influence we had was French. Now, the French weren't here as long, so they had less direct influence on us. But the French brought with them their love of breads and pastries. Oh, I make a Spanish bread in the village because, frankly, I am not a good enough cook to make French bread. That French bread, those French pastries, they are incredible. And the French, you know how the French are, they raised dining to an art form. It wasn't just to live, it was to live, enjoy life. One thing that was important in the French tradition was, you may have heard of the casket girls. They were really women from the streets of Paris who were given a little box of household goods and sent to New France, New Orleans, to provide women for the male settlers. They were going to be what made it a home, a culture, brought some civilization. The problem was they didn't know how to cook. They were street women from Paris. So they got a lady named Madame Langlois, who was a wife of one of the executives of the government, And she taught them how to cook. I've got a book up here called Madame Langlois' Legacy. All of her recipes are the foundation for what we consider Creole and Cajun Southern cooking. She was incredibly important. And because we're so close to New Orleans and Mobile, even when we weren't under French control, we were still trading back and forth with Mobile. People were intermarrying. We were getting trade stuffs from New Orleans, and we got those French foodways blended into our pottage of Pensacola. Then we have British. Now the British, what can you say about the British Empire? Nothing that hasn't already been said. The British Empire, the main thing I tell people in the village is that the British Empire ruled the world, sent out ships and soldiers to get spices so that they could never use them in their cooking. British is bland. British is plain. British is heavy. Suet pies and plum puddings. Not really suitable for Florida. So when they got here, the British had to get in touch with the Native Americans and the Spanish and the people who were used to hotter cultures, the African Americans, and learn a little bit better way to live than lard pies. But they did bring with them wheat bread, white flour. Now, the poor people in Pensacola stuck with cornbread. Corn can be raised here, corn's plentiful, corn's cheap. The Native Americans were grinding corn 14,000 years ago. But the British wanted that good, light wheat flour. So they imported it, and it was very expensive. You could tell, with foodways, you can tell about people from what they eat and how they serve it. If you go in my house and I've got white bread, that's just like wearing jewelry. You know that I've got it. If I go in your house and you're serving salt pork and cornbread, you ain't got it. So white bread was very important. Beef and pork preservation became more prevalent. There was some going on. The Native Americans smoked meat, the Spanish salted cod, but the British really developed food preservation. And they're what led us into modern canning, refrigeration, shelf-stable foods. They didn't want to eat in unison with the seasons, eat what was available. If they wanted, fresh peaches, they wanted peaches. So they learned to cook them into jellies or to pickle them so that they could have those things all year round. Those were the things that they gave us. So then we come to the conclusion. Once you've got everything in that great big pottage, all the different pieces, the average colonial Pensacolian would depend on these foods. They'd eat cornbread and rice because, like I said, we like the wheat flour, but it's expensive. Rice was important, cornbread, potatoes, because we work hard in a colony. We're sailors, we're timbermen, we're explorers, we're hunters. We need carbohydrates, people. Now, nowadays, we cut back on the carbohydrates because we're not out there raising the sails and hoisting the whatevers. We're sedentary. We don't need carbs, but they lived for carbs. Carbs kept them alive. Preserved meats, seafood, molasses, and honey. Sugar was another one of those things. It's wonderful. We all love sugar. Queen Elizabeth II ate so much of it that her teeth went black, and the women in her court started dyeing their teeth black to look good like her. But I digress. Sugar was great. Sugar made the British Empire the wealthiest in the world on the backs of enslaved people in the Caribbean and going through the Middle Passage. When you raised sugar in the Caribbean or in Louisiana, you shipped it to Europe because it got great big prices over there. So the people in Pensacola, the Intendant, the Spanish governor, the British governor, they had white sugar, but the average Pensacolian was sweetening with molasses or honey. They had seasonal fruits. They had beans and stews. Again, the pottage or the olla, where they cook everything all together. So I asked AI, I know we're not, let me skip ahead. I know we're not supposed to use AI, it's terrible and horrible, but I did ask it to make a picture of a typical colonial meal in, say, 1760. And this is what it gave me. Nice, fresh, seasonal fruit from here, peaches and blackberries. We've got some citrus, but it's preserved. Seville oranges grow here, they're very bitter. We've got some of them down in the village, but if you're gonna eat those, you're going to want to preserve them in sugar or syrup or something. We've got the cornbread, we've got the rice, and we've got a great big old piece of salt pork. That is what you would walk into the house at the end of the day and expect to see in a colonial kitchen. Now, the colonial kitchen, how did we cook it? I love my open hearth cooking at the village. I can get 5 pots going in one stove with different heat levels on all of them. It's so much fun. Y'all got to come down and watch me do it sometime, or even come help me. They have a beehive oven. Now, I will tell you, the beehive oven is no fun. The beehive oven, Philip can tell you, Matt, Rosa can tell you, the beehive oven and I have a history. Kind of like the history of the French and the English. It's very difficult. Now, if I had been raised from 5 years old cooking in a beehive oven, I would know how to do it. But I put my heat in that oven. By the way, you don't cook over a fire in a beehive oven. You put the fire in, warm the stones up. Sometimes it gets up 700, 800 degrees in there. Then you sweep the fire and ashes out, and you cook with the radiant heat from the stone. Okay, if you try to use fire in a beehive oven, everything's just going to burn up. But anyway, if I fire that oven up, I look at it and I can't tell you if it's 700 degrees or 200 degrees. It's hot. That's all I know. There are 2 ways colonial women would have used, or colonial men, bakers were men, would have used. One is the cornmeal method. You take a handful of cornmeal, throw it in, and time how fast it turns black. The hotter the oven, the faster it turns black. The other way, which I do not recommend, is put your arm in the oven and see how long you can hold it there. This is not a good method. But I wouldn't have needed one of those methods if Mama had taught me from childhood, this is what it feels like when it's ready for a cake. This is what it feels like when it's ready for cookies. Okay? So a lot of foodways is the way you grow up with it and you just absorb it. Just like we all know you have turkey at Thanksgiving. Just like we know after school you have milk and cookies. These are just things we grow up with and we've absorbed. Now, if any of you tried my colonial king cake, I need to know what y'all think about it. It's got a little bit different flavor than the cakes we're used to, mainly because the British were very into flower waters. They used rose water, lavender water, orange blossom water, jasmine water, and it gives a different taste. If you get heavy with the rose water, it's like eating soap. But if you just put a little bit in there, it gives it an interesting flavor. So y'all try some of the queen cake and let me know what you think. The reason that I brought red wine, this is a red wine blend, and a red wine blend in colonial days was called claret. The important thing about pound cake and claret is that the British generals did not live like peasants. The British generals, if we can't be gentlemen, what are we fighting for? So they take their fine china, they take their chef, they take their servants to the battlefield with them. And the night before Yorktown, Cornwallis is fixing to get his head handed to him the next morning. General Lord Cornwallis had his officers stop by for some cake and claret. And they all had a good time, and the American soldiers said they could hear the party over at Cornwallis's tent. And they come out the next way and get slaughtered. And one patriot wrote, they had cake and claret, we had crusts and courage. So that was how we won our independence. Not incidentally, the American Revolution was won here in Pensacola. If you don't know that story, get with me afterwards. We won it, not Yorktown. So anyway, that is your colonial queen cake. And The University Historic Trust is who I work for, who I volunteer for. They're what makes the village and all our living history possible. We want to preserve the way it was. You understand Pensacola if you understand who these people were. Yeah, there was the Intendant. He was rich. He was part of the pottage. But me, most of the time, I'm a poor Spanish housewife. I'm part of the pottage that makes up Pensacola. All of us are. My sixth great-grandfather was a trader for Panton Leslie. He's part of that. We call it the Great American Melting Pot, but in Pensacola, it's an olla or a pottage or a big pot of gumbo. We're all in there together. It's all very flavorful and it's blended, but throughout it, there are bits that haven't melted. You'll get a chunk of meat. You'll get a chunk of okra. You'll see a little bit of rice. That's America. We are all together. We're all one big old olla or pottage, but we still carry those foodways and the memories of who we were. And that's why foodways are important. Anybody got any questions? If we got time. Have we got time for questions? Anybody questions? Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask one about Yopon?
Yopon.
I harvest mine, but I read in one of the books, it just came out, the great cookbooks we got, we say order some more. It has the histories that have the recipes. Since I harvest my own, it says, if you don't do it right, it's fatal. Can you help me out with that?
Excuse me, I didn't hear the last
If you
part.
don't do it right, it's fatal.
No. If you consume too much of it. Remember, Yopon is a native plant. It's related to holly, and its scientific name is Ilex vomitorum, which tells you if you drink too much Yopon, what's going to happen. But if you just pick it, toast it, make a nice light tea out of it, it actually is the only Native American plant that's caffeinated. So the Native Americans learned that you could get that coffee buzz by roasting your Yopon leaves, brewing them into tea, and having it as a morning beverage. But they took it a little bit further, and that's where you get into the idea that it might be toxic. The Native Americans cooked something called black drink, which was used in their religious rituals. Again, foodways or religion. They made it very thick, very strong, very intense. They would take it into what some cultures would call a sweat lodge, get very hot, drink a lot of that very thick, very potent Yopon tea, and have hallucinations. And the hallucinations were sent from God to guide the people. So that, if you overdo your Yopon, you're going to be tripping out and you might die. Okay? Yes, sir?
But the berries are always toxic.
I believe so. I've never done anything with the berries. I know how to harvest the leaves. You know, I pick me a good bunch of Yopon leaves, throw them in a skillet, and just roast them slow over the fire, then crumble them up, put them in, I get little muslin baggies, put it in that, and we drink Yopon tea. Anything else?
Couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
One has probably not a lot to do with food. The Native Americans, 14,000 years ago to whenever, colonization, were they fighting all the time, one tribe with the other?
They did, sure. People can't get along.
They decided to eat and forage and all that stuff.
You know, you get this idea from Rousseau of the noble savage, you know, living in peace and harmony all the time. They fought. The different tribes, even different clans, different families would fight. They're human. They're just like all of us. You know, and when we get to the Creek Wars, where the Europeans were impinging upon the Creeks, you've got the Creeks that sided with the Europeans, you've got the Creeks that fought the Europeans. Human beings are going to find a way to fight. Whatever culture, whatever foodway, whatever period of history, they're going to fight.
And relative to the cookbook that's coming out,
Yes, ma'am.
how's it organized?
Organized similar to this. Yeah, we go through pretty much the 5 flags, although because the Confederacy was so influenced by the enslaved people's cooking, I don't use the Confederate flag, I use the African diaspora to represent that stream of culture. Oh, I hope it's going to be good. We've been working on it forever. It will be good. It will be good. Anyway, other questions? Yes, sir.
What role did sweet potatoes play?
Sweet potatoes were important. Now remember, we call them yams. They are not yams. Yam was a different animal or different plant that grew in Africa. But when the enslaved people got here, the Europeans here were growing sweet potatoes, and they were similar enough that nowadays you have candied yams for Thanksgiving, even though they're not really yams. Sweet potatoes were important. Again, that carbohydrate hit. And they're a lot more palatable than just a plain baked potato. You can throw a sweet potato in the oven, and even without some salt and sugar and honey, it's still going to be pretty tasty. You throw a plain potato in there, and it's not going to be as good. So sweet potato was very important. Gourds were important. The African Americans had a history of cooking with gourds back in Africa. They came here, found the pumpkins and squash, the three sisters, and they incorporated it into their cooking. Everybody borrows and gives. The African Americans borrowed the French spices, but they gave back the okra and the yams, sweet potatoes. Yes, sir.
Now, I'm assuming that, I mean, you mentioned pork and salt cod and so forth. What about the rabbit, deer, you know, the wildlife? I mean, this place must have been teeming with deer.
Absolutely. Rabbit, you can trap easily. Even if you can't get anything by hunting, get a big animal, you can usually go out and set a snare and you'll get some stringy old rabbit, which they would live on if that's what they had. It's just like us, you know, ribeye is the top of the line. Salt pork, not so much. You ate what you had available. But based on what the Native Americans taught the Europeans when they got here, and the Europeans had a long tradition of hunting. These are just different animals. But hunting, trapping, all of that was very important. But the Europeans brought in with them the domesticated animals. You know, interesting thing about wild boar. We have a lot of wild boar in the South. People pay a lot of money to go out on wild boar hunts. How do we get wild pigs in Florida and Alabama? DeSoto marched from somewhere around Sarasota all the way till he discovered the Mississippi River, which everybody in America knew was there all along, but he discovered it. He brought a flock of pigs to feed his soldiers. Pigs are very prone to getting out of their pen and running into the woods. And every time you go boar hunting in the South, you are hunting the descendants of DeSoto's pigs. They went out into the woods, got feral, and became a favorite food of the Native Americans, and you know, still to this day. My dad was a hunting guide in the swamps of South Georgia, and rich people would pay him to hunt a boar so they could stick an apple in its mouth and have a party. So, yes. Anything else? There are so many stories I could tell you that just come see me in the village and I will just subject you to all kinds of weird little facts about food. I try to be there every Tuesday, and then I'm there once or twice the rest of the week. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter, y'all may have heard. If she's sick, if she's got a ballet recital, if she's got anything, then I am not in the village, because I'm a volunteer. What's Philip going to do, fire me? So, but we try to cook. Like I said, I cook at least once, usually 2 or 3 times. We've got another cook, Brenna. We've got Pam who does some cooking. I try to do bread 2 or 3 times a month in the beehive oven, which I hate and despise, but I still try to do it. Yeah, just if you want to, in the morning, call down here and Philip can probably, or somebody in the office can probably tell you what we've got going on. We've got gardening, we've got music, we've got children's games, woodworking, just all different kinds of colonial activities for you to see.